Daily Words of God. Matthew chapter 12, verse 1. At that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were an hungered, and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. Matthew chapter 12, verses 6 through 8. But I say to you, that in this place is one greater than the temple. But if you had known what this means, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. Let us first take a look at this passage. At that time Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were an hungered, and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. Why have I selected this passage? What connection does it have to God's disposition? In this text, the first thing we know is that it was the Sabbath day. But the Lord Jesus went out and led his disciples through the cornfields. What is even more treacherous is that they even began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. In the age of law, Jehovah God's law stipulated that people could not casually go out or take part in activities on the Sabbath. There were many things that could not be done on the Sabbath. This action on the part of the Lord Jesus was puzzling for those who had lived under the law for a long time, and it even provoked criticism. As for their confusion and how they talked about what Jesus did, we will put that aside for now and first discuss why the Lord Jesus chose to do this on the Sabbath of all days, and what he wanted to communicate to people who were living under the law through this action. This is the connection between this passage and God's disposition that I want to talk about. When the Lord Jesus came, he used his practical actions to tell the people that God had departed the age of law and had begun new work, and that this new work did not require the observation of the Sabbath. God's coming out from the confines of the Sabbath day was just a foretaste of his new work. The real and great work was still to come. When the Lord Jesus began his work, he had already left behind the shackles of the age of law and had broken through the regulations and principles of that age. In him, there was no trace of anything related to the law. He had cast it off entirely and no longer observed it, and he no longer required mankind to observe it. So here you see the Lord Jesus went through the cornfields on the Sabbath, and that the Lord did not rest. He was outside working and not resting. This action of his was a shock to people's notions, and it communicated to them that he no longer lived under the law, and that he had left the confines of the Sabbath and appeared before mankind and in their midst in a new image, with a new way of working. This action of his told people that he had brought with him new work that began with emerging from being under the law and departing from the Sabbath. When God carried out his new work, he no longer clung to the past, and he was no longer concerned about the regulations of the age of law. Neither was he affected by his work in the previous age, but instead worked on the Sabbath just as he did on every other day. And when his disciples were hungry on the Sabbath, they could pick ears of corn to eat. This was all very normal in God's eyes. For God, it is permissible to have a new beginning for much of the new work he wants to do and the new words he wants to say. When he begins something new, He neither mentions his previous work nor continues to carry it out. Because God has his principles in his work, when he wants to begin new work, it is when he wants to bring mankind into a new stage of his work, and when his work will enter a higher phase. If people continue to act according to the old sayings or regulations, or continue to hold fast to them, he will not remember or approve that. This is because he has already brought new work and has entered a new phase of his work. When he initiates new work, he appears to mankind with a completely new image, from a completely new angle, and in a completely new way, so that people can see different aspects of his disposition and what he has and is. This is one of his goals in his new work. God does not cling to old things or walk the well-trodden path. When he works and speaks, he is not as prohibitive as people imagine. In God, all is free and liberated, and there is no prohibition, no constraints. What he brings to mankind is freedom and liberation. He is a living God, a God who genuinely, truly exists. He is not a puppet or a clay figure, and he is totally different from the idols that people enshrine and worship. He is living and vibrant, and what his words and work bring to mankind is all life and light, all freedom and liberation, because he holds the truth, the life, and the way. He is not constrained by anything in any of his work. No matter what people say, and no matter how they see or assess his new work, he will carry out his work without a qualm. He will not worry about anyone's notions or finger-pointing as concerns his work and words, or even their strong opposition and resistance to his new work. No one among all of creation can use human reason or human imagination, knowledge, or morality to measure or define what God does, to discredit, disrupt, or sabotage his work. There is no prohibition in his work and what he does. It will not be constrained by any man, event, or thing, nor will it be disrupted by any hostile forces. As far as his new work is concerned, he is an ever-victorious king, and any hostile forces and all the heresies and fallacies of mankind are trampled under his footstool. No matter which new stage of his work he is carrying out, it will surely be developed and expanded in mankind's midst, and it will surely be carried out unhindered throughout the entire universe until his great work has been completed. This is God's almightiness and wisdom, his authority and power. Thus, the Lord Jesus could openly go out and work on the Sabbath, because in his heart there were no rules, no knowledge or doctrine that originated from mankind. What he had was God's new work and God's way. His work was the way to free mankind, to release people, to allow them to exist in the light and to live. Meanwhile, those who worship idols or false gods live every day bound by Satan, restrained by all kinds of rules and taboos. Today, one thing is prohibited, tomorrow another. There is no freedom in their lives. They are like prisoners in shackles, living life with no joy to speak of. What does prohibition represent? It represents constraints, bonds, and evil. As soon as a person worships an idol, They are worshiping a false god, an evil spirit. Prohibition comes along when such activities are engaged in. You cannot eat this or that. Today you cannot go out. Tomorrow you cannot cook. The next day you cannot move to a new house. Certain days must be selected for weddings and funerals, and even for giving birth to a child. What is this called? This is called prohibition. It is the bondage of mankind, and it is the shackles of Satan and evil spirits controlling people and restraining their hearts and bodies. Do these prohibitions exist with God? When speaking of the holiness of God, you should first think of this. With God, there are no prohibitions. God has principles in His words and work, but there are no prohibitions, because God Himself is the truth, the way, and the life.